Good evening, everyone. Oh, this is definitely on. Thank you all for being here. This evening's presentation marks the 6th and final talk in the Park Street series this year. Our theme for the year has been the health of the planet, and we've heard from multiple perspectives on topics related to sustainability, climate change, food security, and ethics. As many of you know, the Park Street series has been made possible by a bequest from the family of the late Father Quinn, and we have some members of the Sullivan family here tonight. We're happy to see them. Whose dedication to furthering conversations on topics relating to social justice closely align with the goals of our speakers, and I think with the central mission of BC. We're really fortunate tonight to have with us Nikki Silvestri as our culminating speaker. And Nikki comes not unattended, but she'll say something about that in a moment because there's a very young member of the audience who's with us here as well. You'll in short order learn more of and from our speaker, but first she will be introduced by Tara Pisani-Garreau, who is the Associate Director of both the minor and the major in Environmental Studies at Boston College. So can I ask you all now if you would silence things that beep and turn them off? And join me as we welcome Tara to introduce this evening's speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's my great honor and pleasure to welcome the food justice visionary and leader, Nikki Silvestri, to Boston College. Nikki is the CEO and founder of Soil and Shadow, an organization that works on environmental justice and community health through soil restoration. So let's let that idea really sink in for a moment. Nikki is here to connect the dots for us on how soil, Earth's living skin that lies at the interface between rock, water, atmosphere, and life, connects to human and community well-being. Now, Nikki, we've been in a very long winter here, and for many of us, we're just starting to see soil, so I figured, I hope I didn't take your title too literally, but I brought some soil for my garden, so we don't have too much growing right now, but if you need a little whiff of something earthy to get us started, I'm going to pass you.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't like that, thank you. For students in sustainable agriculture, this is the norm for us, so that's okay. But before she does connect those dots, let me tell you a little bit more about Nikki's distinguished background in environmental justice, ethics, and equity, which I think mimics the diversity of microorganisms that are central to soil restoration. And I mean that because she's played many roles and has tackled social environmental issues from multiple angles. From 2010 to 2013, she was the executive director of People's Grocery, a nonprofit grocery store in West Oakland, California, that aims to improve community health by improving people's access to and knowledge about healthy, fresh foods. Nikki then became the director of Green for All, a nonprofit organization founded by Van Jones that works to build an inclusive climate movement and green economy to lift people of all colors and backgrounds out of poverty. Nikki is a faculty member at the Culinary Institute of America's Food Business School, where she co-designed and taught one of their inaugural courses, Ethical Leadership in Food Business. There are a lot of really cool courses in this school, so I encourage you to check it out. She sits on the board of directors of the Business Alliance of Local Living Economies, BALE, that works with entrepreneurs, investors, funders, and community leaders to develop local economies that work for all while regenerating the natural environment, hence living economies. She is also an advisory board member of Me, the Next Gen social network that values privacy, respect, and safety, and Tend Lab, an organization that helps parents integrate their parenting skills into their careers. So as you can see, a great diversity of projects that she's been working on for a number of years. This diverse work led to Nikki Silvestri being named one of the Roots 100 Most Influential African Americans in 2014. On the subject of influential African American leaders, this week we mourn the loss of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was assassinated 50 years ago in Memphis, Tennessee, during a trip to support a sanitation workers' strike for better working conditions. We reflect on Dr. King's legacy of nonviolent campaigns for racial equality and non-discrimination, which led to the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965. But there are signs today that still point to the work that needs to get done to provide all people with the opportunities to lead a healthy life and to realize their full potential. For example, rates of food insecurity are disproportionately higher in minority households, and research shows that children from insecure homes have poorer overall health status, they're sick more often, they have nutrient deficiencies, they're hospitalized more frequently, and they miss more school. Obviously, this puts people at a big disadvantage. But there is hope. As Dr. King's vision, spirit, and commitment to a just world marches on with a new generation of leaders like Nikki Silvestri. Please join me in thanking Nikki for coming to Boston College to share with us her life's work on building healthy communities.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
There we go. Bright faces. So I want you to turn really quickly and whisper in this direction. Say, hi, Ikenna. All those people are saying hi to you. It's my 4.5-month-old son. And I figured if we acknowledge his presence, then he might allow mommy to get through the entire speech. That's what we're going for. So thank you so much for having me. This is really wonderful. This topic, when I was preparing for this talk, it was actually there are things that I've said before that now that I'm a mother feel differently when I'm saying them. And so this is gonna be the first talk actually that I give where I talk about my topic and my love and my passion for soil and the planet with a new imperative for the future generations. So I'm really excited for your questions and answers. And speaking of questions, one thing I like to do is I like to start with what's on your mind, especially considering that I'm a culminating talk. I'm curious if, based on hearing my bio or just things that you've been thinking about, and even just looking at the title, is there anything that's just like, yeah, I really want to know more about that? Where are you? After sniffing some soil. You are like, it's 7 o'clock. And I was actually just looking forward to coming in and listening for a little bit. I completely understand that. And I'm going to do my very best to be entertaining because this is a topic that's very close to my heart. So just be thinking about that as I'm talking. What's stirring in you? Well, it doesn't have to be a question, but during the question and answer period, I'd also love to hear comments if you have them. The core of my work is building strong communities. And building strong communities starts with relationship. So I wanted to start our relationship by telling you my food story, because that's where it all begins for me. My mom was real hardcore before she got pregnant with me. I was baby number 1, and she put my dad on a diet before they conceived so that he would be virile and really just like the best. Then they conceived. She was on a diet when she was pregnant. She was on a diet. I'm not talking about diet like she was dieting to lose weight. She was doing all the research back in the early 80s on what one should be eating. And then she realized that it wasn't just about pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, and nursing, because then she got pregnant with my brother. So she was basically on this diet for like 10 years. And then said, okay, this is just how I eat now. And it was an imperative for her in part because she saw my great aunts and great uncles and things struggling with diet-related disease. I don't have any, that's true, on my mom's side, I don't have any great aunts or uncles that didn't pass away with some kind of amputation as a result of diabetes. Aunt Mildred lost 3 limbs, Uncle Bate lost his foot. I mean, it was just like every relative I could just name. And so I learned really as a little kid to ask questions like, what's the connection between losing feeling in your feet and diabetes? Because it didn't immediately make sense to me, because I thought diabetes was about sugar. And they had to explain all of that to me. And as a statistic for you, African Americans are 1.7 times more likely to get diabetes than white Americans. And a lot of that just has to do with our genetic makeup, and I will come back to that toward the end because that also hit me more personally later on. So growing up eating like that in my parents' home, and when I say eating like that, I mean we had to beg for sure. We had to beg for sugar. Y'all remember Raisin Bran? That was like the crystals on the raisins. You know, like, I don't even know if they sell that stuff, and I'm talking about it like it doesn't exist. But you can tell I don't eat it anymore. But when we were kids, that was like the sign of the times for us. We could either get the Raisin Bran with the sugar crystals on the raisins, or the plain, nasty, grown-up Raisin Bran. And we always had to eat the plain, nasty, grown-up Raisin Bran, and my dad would say, just be glad we're letting you have raisins. And we thought that it was cruel and unusual punishment when we were kids. And now I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I think it saved a lot of my body, frankly, growing up like that. So then my palate changed, and as I aged and when I went into college, I became a super hippie. Like, super hippie. I moved into the Los Angeles Eco Village when I went into my graduate program at UCLA. And Los Angeles Eco Village, so it's an intentional community for anyone who doesn't know about that. Functionally, they're communes, just like updated with a different name so that the commune word doesn't evoke the things that it evoked. But living intentionally at that point meant that we would meet once a week to talk about what was going on with the property. We were transitioning to a limited liability co-op so that we could have equity instead of just paying rent. It was super cool. We had chickens in the background, tore out the pool, and had a humongous garden. So I was walking around barefoot with dreadlocks, wearing patchouli for deodorant, like all of the stereotypes. And my parents were deeply concerned. But one of the things that came out of that period that was wonderful was me learning about community-supported agriculture. I had no idea what that was. And so a truck would come. We had a relationship with a farm that would come to the Eco Village, and we would divvy up the shares ourselves and pass them out to the surrounding neighborhood, people who would buy them. And that was where I learned that I had a palette of functionally 20 different vegetables and fruits that I grew up with, and didn't eat anything outside of that, and didn't even know it. I had to keep knocking on my neighbor's door. What is this? That's kale. The hell is kale? It's not collard greens. It's not lettuce. And I would just rattle off all the greens I knew. They were like, no, it's a dark leafy green. There's also something called chard. What? So I just started learning all this stuff. I realized I didn't really know what a turnip looked like when it was whole. I mean, my grandmother cooked turnips all the time, but I always saw the mushy, the little white mushy things that were inside other dishes, but I'd never actually cooked a turnip or had it the way foodies eat it with like butter and salt. It's very strange. It's how foodies eat radishes too. Good note. But it was a really different way to eat. And I could feel my body getting better as a result. And it completely turned the course of my career. And it made me ask the question, why doesn't everybody have access to food like this? Just real talk, right? I thought my parents ate really, really healthy. We would do the brown rice, a vegetable, and a protein thing almost every night. That was how my mom cooked. But I had no idea that there was this whole other world of complexity around eating in a healthy way. And then growing up, I'll go into my career history in a minute, but I eat and continue to eat really healthy. He knows that I do. He's like, my breast milk. That's my breast milk talking right now. So I eat really, really healthy right now in my life. And I thought that I was gonna escape any diet-related disease, anything, in my family. And then I got pregnant. And this is the new part of my story that I haven't shared yet because it's new. And that's when I was 28 weeks, I got tested for gestational diabetes like everybody does. And I had it. And I was shocked. Because that is not something I identified myself with, ever. The way that I eat, and I mean, y'all, I work with a ranch. The lamb that I have in my freezer, the 52 pounds of lamb that I got when I bought my half of a lamb, I knew those lambs. I fed those lambs. I celebrated the spirits of those lambs, bless their hearts, when they were processed to go into my freezer. I eat really well. So it was incredibly disappointing to me to find out that I had gestational diabetes. And then I ended up having to eat paleo for the remainder of my pregnancy. And still, I just had my blood panel done to see if the gestational diabetes went away. And what it functionally says is that I'm pre-diabetic, which is not even something I knew existed before about a year ago. If I ate like normal people, well, if I ate the way that I used to eat, which is occasionally doing mud pies and churros and Mexican bread pudding and all of the delicious desserts that I like to eat at my foodie restaurants in the Bay Area, I would be spiking my blood sugar. I ate a Luna bar and almost had to go to the hospital. Like, that's how intense it was when I was pregnant. And so, this thing about my personal story shaping my career and health and food systems being important to me is very, very real now. I'm accepting that I'm not ever going to be able to eat the way that I ate when I was a young adult ever again, if I want to stay on the good side of not taking medication. And I'm comfortable making that wager, but I also am intending to continue to work on the systems that make it difficult for me to eat paleo. I mean, the amount of money we have to spend during paleo is just, it's meat, it's vegetables, it's fruit, it's grains, it's no grains, it's seeds and it's nuts. Those 5 food groups, that's what paleo is, which means you're eating a ton of meat, and meat is expensive if you want to get good meat. So, roping all of this back into health, I've always felt like health was a gateway to learning other things about the environment because it's something so personal to everybody. And that's the way that I approached it in my career. I make this connection now through soil, but it was a very, very windy road to get there. I started working in climate change, and that started because I saw An Inconvenient Truth when it first came out. Before I saw An Inconvenient Truth, what I intended to go into was Black theater and study folklore. Talk about a departure, right? It was like my family legacy. A quick interlude, because we have time in my speech, why I'm into Black folklore is because of my family legacy. My great-grandfather was one of the first Black men in blackface in the South. And if you're not familiar with blackface, it's minstrelsy and theater, where white men would smear their faces with coal to pantomime acting out as Black people. And you couldn't do that if you were Black yourself. It was just white men were allowed to act like Black people, but Black people weren't allowed to be on stage. So Black men said, you know what? If we smear coal in our faces, they can't tell we're Black. So they started smearing coal in their faces and pretending to be white men, pretending to be Black men. And that was my great-grandfather. Alan Jones and his 7 brown babies. And I do believe that my great-grandmother was one of those brown babies. And then they had my grandfather, Carl Jones Sr., who was a member of the Delta Rhythm Boys. And he was prolific in Hollywood when it came to doing soundtracks. And one of my favorite stories about him in terms of his race relations is that he worked on the soundtrack to Gone with the Wind. And so he was on set all the time when it was going on. And it was the first huge Hollywood production where they had to have a bunch of extras and porta potties and all different kinds of things. So he and his best friend, being troublemakers, start wandering around set and find Clark Gable's trailer. They go into his trailer, I think they might have been slightly intoxicated, and they start talking about race relations in the United States and how the porta potties are segregated with colored and white porta potties, and how we need to desegregate the porta potties because all of the extras deserve their equality. And they got Clark Gable so incensed about this that he went to the director and said, I'm walking off the set unless we desegregate the set of Gone with the Wind. And that's how the set of Gone with the Wind was desegregated, because my grandfather got a little tipsy one day and decided to cause a riot. So you're never too young or too sober to cause change. That's the point of that message. But I really took to heart the fact that my family had a legacy of entertainment and of telling stories, and it's something I continue to weave into my career, but I was totally on that track. Then I saw An Inconvenient Truth and thought, oh, well, if we don't have air to breathe, we can't act on stage. So it's probably really important that I switch my career right now. And that was really the way that I was thinking, because I mean, a lot of you are college students, so you don't remember when An Inconvenient Truth came out probably, but it was hardcore. Al Gore was going in. He was like, we gonna die. We're gonna die. Because nobody's paying attention to this, and unless we fix this by like 2008, the wheels are gonna fall off the wagon. And I believed it, but you know, you believe stuff like that when you're young and passionate. So I changed my whole career and started working on green jobs. And the cool thing about working on green jobs at that point was so the crash wasn't cool, but what was cool about our field at that time in the crash is that everybody thought that the old way of doing economics was wrong. And this new future, where we were gonna rebuild the energy grid and build a green economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty and create millions of new jobs doing the basic caulk gun and building construction stuff that's off the shelf, was really exciting to a lot of economists. And it was very exciting to me. But really what was interesting to me was the health angle when it came to green jobs. That a lot of people were still working in coal mines and it was destroying health. And that a lot of power plants were still in operation that could be decommissioned. And those power plants were in the vicinity of neighborhoods that I really cared about. I lived right next to one when we were in West Oakland. So I was really thinking about air pollution when it came to green jobs and how the decrease in air pollution could really help my communities. And part of why that was also personal for me is that I grew up next door to the largest urban oil field in the country. It's the Inglewood Oil Field. It's 1,100 acres. And it's next to the most affluent African-American community in Los Angeles. And so it's one of the things that's often cited as an example of environmental injustice and how it cuts across race lines more deeply than it cuts across class lines. So that was really exciting until it wasn't for me, because jobs development became very boring and very not connected to people at some point. It was a lot of politics, and it became a little scary, frankly. But when I was at my peak in that movement, what I wanted to do was to help people understand that there is a path forward that doesn't involve you needing to make more money. It doesn't involve you needing to pay more money for your energy bills. We really supported Obama's Clean Power Plan. When I was in Green Jobs, I started as an executive aide and came back to the same organization, Green for All, as the executive director years later. But I continued to have kind of a climate theme underneath all of that, and I did the exact same thing both times. And it was beautiful, but as I said, it wasn't the passion of my heart. The passion of my heart was food. And so that's when we transitioned into my food story. About the same time, in 2009, that the economy crashed, Michelle Obama planted the White House garden. And I got super excited and thought, okay, this is an opportunity for food systems to get deep investment because somebody with a lot of power is talking about it. So as the executive director of People's Grocery in West Oakland, it was a real opportunity to do local economic development in a way that was super powerful. And the health angle, come on, it was huge. There's one big public hospital in Oakland, Highland Hospital. And we developed a program there for the Pediatric Obesity Clinic with children who were under the age of 4 who were obese, where we would provide them with a community supported agriculture box as a prescription. And those prescription programs are now kind of prolific all over the country. But at that point, they weren't being documented like a clinical study. They were just being put into hospitals as kind of an experiment. And so we documented it as a clinical study. And it was pretty astonishing. We made sure that the moms were switching recipes because a lot of them didn't know how to cook the food. But it was wonderful watching the food go into a place like Highland Hospital and really transform these people's lives. Another health angle that we took was mental health, interestingly. So we had a garden, our biggest demonstration garden was behind the California Hotel, which is a low-income housing project in kind of West Oakland, on the border of West Oakland and the rest of Oakland. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to those dilapidated hotels that are just barely in code, that have low-income housing, but they're really, really nuts in a way. Like, the rooms may be up to code, but there's a lot of the building that's not up to code, and it's just not a very nice place to live. And so our garden, when we first opened it, there were needles, all of the things you would assume would be in a place like that were in that backyard. And we became kind of a beacon of hope for the people that lived there. They would talk to us about things when they wouldn't talk to the people who owned the place. They would, bye Kenneth. I see people looking over there. He gets a little antsy when he can hear me, but he can't have access to me. That's what breast milk talking. That's what he's thinking. So when we were at the California Hotel, we had to put our staff through mental health training on how to work in a mental health field because the residents were so bonded to us because we were not only growing food, but we were providing space. And that's where thinking about health and the environment and ethics really comes together for me. Because somewhere like a garden, I mean, there's all kind of documented studies about the calming nature of being out in the environment and foresting. There's like a new term for it in Japan. Like you can just walk next to a forest. You don't even have to do anything, and it just changes your vibe or all different kind of stuff. Earthing is the hippie term for that. But we saw that concept in action at the California Hotel in a way that was pretty astonishing. And it rooted in me how local working national at Green for All was wonderful. And doing that local work where we could see how not just feeding people was transformative, but how creating the space for them to be and to exist was transformative. That's something it's a reason why I'm so into soil now, because that space, that transformative space was just so powerful to observe. So, another concept that really hit home when I was at People's Grocery was the social determinants of health. And that's something that continues to be a deep part of my work when it comes to health and the environment. And a couple of statistics that blew my mind when I first learned about it, and that I encountered actually, one of them during my pregnancy journey, that an African American woman with a PhD has a higher infant mortality rate than a white woman with a high school diploma. And that's still true. And it has to do with a couple of things. So one, it's this forming of your basic systems, your body functions when you're under the age of 5. And if they're formed in a hostile, or what your body registers as a hostile environment, there's built-in weaknesses that you can't ever correct, no matter how middle class or upper class you become later in life. And then there's the cumulative impact of the stress hormone running through your body as an African American your entire life that corrodes different systems. And pregnancy is one of those physical endeavors that tends to show weaknesses that you never even knew were there. And they tend to show up right when your body's the most compromised, i.e. on the border town of life and death when you're going into labor. And so I did experience that. I planned to have a home birth. I was young, I was healthy, etc. I ended up having an unscheduled cesarean because of a lot of the stuff that came up at the end of my pregnancy. So I knew that pretty front and center. Another interesting statistic. So here's West Oakland, here's the city of Piedmont in the city of Oakland. They are a 15, 20-minute drive from each other. Piedmont is a city that's kind of surrounded on all sides by Oakland. It's just a little mini city inside of a city. You live 15 times longer if you live in Piedmont than you do if you live in West Oakland, on average. And it's because of those social determinants of health. The combination of stress and food and not having a job and etc. And so learning about those social determinants of health really broadened the picture for me, and it's what sent me into the next phase of my career, which is soil. So in 2014, I had a bit of a crisis of the heart around, does any of this stuff even matter? A lot of it came from talking to climate scientists in DC who were like, we are going to die. We put some happy stuff at the end of these 300-page reports that we published in the White House. It's a lot worse than that. Getting a climate scientist drunk on a Friday night is not a good time. And you should never do it, because they will make you scared to wake up the next day. And I went through that in 2014, wondering what could actually work, considering how bad the state of the environment was. And then I was invited to a workshop on soil carbon sequestration, a term that I had never heard before. And when I went to this workshop, they were talking about how much carbon you could pull out of the atmosphere if you treated the soil differently. And I was shocked, because I knew, photosynthesis, so I knew about the carbon cycle, but I had no idea that if you treated soil en masse differently, that the quantification of the amount of carbon you could pull out of the atmosphere was actually enough to impact large climate goals. That was not something anyone had ever said to me before. And all these light bulbs started going off in my head about other gaps that I had in the way that I approached my work. I had a gap when it came to equity, because my definition of social equity was people of color, urban. But I realized I work in food systems. How can I only have an urban people of color point of view for food systems? Rural America was completely outside of my point of view, my skill set, my ability to communicate with, and these are the people that were growing our food. And these are the people that have pride in their ranching, in their legacies of ranching and farming. And I had no connection to them whatsoever. And then, of course, I had a limited point of view when it came to agriculture and climate and how the two interacted. So I went on a mission and became a soil nerd. I just want to say, by the way, where is she? Passing around soil? What? That's like, it's super, super endearing. There's this movie with James Franco about meeting his girlfriend's father, whose name I can't remember the name of the movie. He doesn't like the movie. But there was a funny scene where he offers the family surf and turf. He's one of those tech guys where everything's super cool. And surf and turf traditionally is steak and lobster, steak and some kind of seafood, right? But their version of surf and turf was edible soil with sea foam, like edible sea foam on top of it, served in spoons. But what's funny is I didn't get it was a joke at first. Like, I saw the scene, I was like, that is so cool. And my parents are laughing their behinds off. And I was like, oh, that was a joke. Because steak and seafood people don't want to eat edible soil, word. But I think that my nerdiness, that was just a demonstrative story about my nerdiness. So what's so cool about soil? Why am I such a nerd about it? Nutrient density. Also not a term that I ever really heard before I started studying soil. But nutrient density is amazing. It talks about how many nutrients are actually in your food that you're eating, right? And I was working in food security in the inner city, talking to people who said, I can't afford to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, and saying, well, just eat as many as you can. And it never hit me that there is a statistic where you would have to eat 8 oranges today to get the same amount of vitamin A as our grandparents got from eating an orange back then in their day. 8 oranges. So when my people in West Oakland are saying I can't afford to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, they're literally saying, to get the nutrients now, I have to get a bag of oranges instead of getting 1 orange. And there's other crazy statistics, like looking at data between 1975 and 1997, iron levels dropped 37%, vitamin A levels dropped 21%, vitamin C levels dropped 30% in 12 fresh vegetables that they studied. So this is a real thing, and it has to do with soil degradation, that fruits and vegetables are not able to uptake as many nutrients out of the soil because there just aren't as many nutrients in the soil. We have about 60 years of topsoil left all over the world because of the way that we have been doing agriculture, because we've been degrading our soil over time. So when it comes to personal health, nutrient density is a really big deal. And a cool project that I don't know if I can talk about on camera, so ask me about a cool project with nutrient density once the camera's off and we're talking over to the side. But climate change when it comes to soil. So do not ask me how soil carbon sequestration works, because it's one of those things where the more I hear about it, the less I understand. So I can try to tell you, but I'm not gonna be able to tell you in depth. I will point you to the Carbon Cycle Institute and kiss the ground for really good, detailed layman's terms on how you get more carbon into the soil. But the brief thing I will say about it is that photosynthesis is the basic process that creates the carbon cycle in plants that we all know about. But the term sequestration specifically applies to trying to have long-term sinks of carbon in the soil. And if it's in the first top 18 inches of soil, then whenever the soil gets disturbed by tilling or just by normal processes, the carbon will just get released back to the atmosphere. And some of that is normal. But if you get it below 18 inches where it should be, then it forms these little beautiful crystallized structures that hold the carbon for up to a few hundred years, which is really cool. So climate change, how much carbon can we sequester? If you go to Earth's CO2 homepage It will give you a month-by-month, blow-by-blow of how much parts per million of carbon we have in the atmosphere, which is super cool. Right now, we're at just under 410 parts per million. Where are we supposed to be to not have a catastrophic tipping point? 350, exactly. We could sequester the 50 to 60 million parts, the 50 to 60 parts per million of carbon we need to get back to 350 easily if we redid the world's agriculture. I think it's Ratan Lal from Ohio State University, this is his statistic, and I think he was doing it for different parts of the world to see if like America just took that on, or if France and Germany just took that on, if places that were open to it would take it on, could they alone sequester that? And he's still working out those numbers, but it's looking very promising. And he tends to be incredibly conservative, and any statistic he puts out 2 months later, if you call him, he's like, that's wrong. Because he tries to really keep up to date, and he tries to make sure that there is hope that is not unfounded. So that really tells you something, that 50 to 60 parts per million like that is a really big deal. But in order to do that, another thing that would need to change is the workforce. And that's one of the things in terms of ethics that's very exciting to me about soil carbon and about soil, is that it's not impossible to do it if you gave one large entity $1 billion to remake regenerative agriculture, but it would be so much harder to do it that way than it would be to support farmers and ranchers to do it. And part of the reason for that is that soil will humble you. Soil has humbled the crap out of me. It is no man's slave. You can work on water, you can work on animal rights, you can work on forests, you can work on so many other things and be unintentionally degrading other parts of that ecosystem without even knowing. But it is very hard to work on soil health and be degrading any other ecological system because it doesn't fake the funk. The microorganisms in that soil will not thrive if you're not working in a systemic way. And that usually means working in a slow way. It means being responsive. It means understanding that you will have several different microclimates. One of the main ranches I work with is 7,700 acres. And they have so many different microclimates on that land. They have to be very, very intentional if they want to build soil health. And so it's really a reevaluation of the way that we treat those who tend our land. If we really wanted to get serious about soil health, it would require that. And that's incredibly exciting. So then getting specific, how does all this show up in real life? And what do? My business is called Soil and Shadow, and we use soil as both a tangible solution for restoring our ecological devastation, which I've just talked about, but we also use soil as a metaphor for how to interact in relationship. Because one of the big ways to build soil health is to increase the complexity of relationships between the microorganisms and the nutrients that are in soil. And in real life, not real life, but in our human lives, if you increase the complexity of relationships, you also create a lot of fertility for a solid relationship foundation to build almost anything. So I work also with companies, individuals, and initiatives that are looking to increase the complexity of their relationships so that they can do good work. I talk about social fertility and soil fertility a lot, kind of side by side, and what soil has taught me there. Shadow, because, this country right now, it's a shadow show. Things are coming out the woodworks every 3 days to the point where a lot of us are desensitized to it. And the shadow that's been in America for, a few hundred years, give or take, is now front and center. But it can be really damaging to know how to surface shadow without knowing how to integrate shadow. So that's also something we work on. Because in a way, soil has been in the shadows when it comes to ecology. There's not a lot of people that work on soil. They work on all the things surrounding soil, but they don't work on increasing soil health because it's not sexy. I make it sexy. Let me tell you how I make it sexy. So I just said a lot of heady stuff around using soil as a metaphor. I was on a podcast talking about all this, and a college professor from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, called me up and said, "Hey, I heard your podcast. Let me run something by you and see if this is what you're talking about. There is a man here on campus who, well, he's not a man on campus. He lived a long time ago. He was one of the architects of white supremacy. His name is also on a ton of stuff, you know, elementary schools, a building, a street, etc. And we are renaming his building to the Women's Building. And I would like to do a performance art piece on the day of the grand reopening that is a pruning workshop that people will not know is a performance art pruning workshop that's going to go into how you prune a diseased limb out of a system, using that pruning workshop as a metaphor for race and how you get race as a diseased limb out of a system. Is this something that you could do? And I said, dude! That was actually my literal response, because I just could not believe. This man was speaking to the black theater part of me. He was speaking to the racial equity part of me. He was speaking to the soil health part of me. He managed to basically develop a project that is exactly what I designed Soil and Shadow to do. So it's gonna be a performance art piece. And I talked to a bunch of different farmers and ranchers about how they do their work, how they would look at pruning trees in an orchard, and how that could be a metaphor for eradicating racism, and got them thinking differently. And it's gonna be a piece that's gonna be performed at UNC, but we're gonna make it so that anybody can workshop it and use it as a performance art piece that applies to their community. Because there's a lot of these buildings in the South, as it turns out, named after all kinds of people. Another thing that I'm really excited about is when it comes to health and soil, we could go down a real rabbit hole when it comes to the microbiome. So we have a gut microbiome, and a lot of integrative practitioners will tell you that gut inflammation and gut health is the core of a lot of human health, like almost all of it. And if you look at the soil microbiome, that's also a key indication of what's going on with the soil. And the exchange between the gut microbiome and the soil microbiome is one of the quickest paths to healing. So there's a medical doctor, Dr. Daphne Miller, who wrote this book called Pharmacology, only with F-A-R-M instead of P-H. And every chapter was looking at what inspiration she drew from the way that biodynamic and regenerative agriculture folk approach their systems for how she could approach her systems of medicine and how we could approach our health systems. So an example of that, right, there's a chapter called Integrated Pest Management as a New Approach to Cancer Care, which is just brilliant, right? Integrated pest management is where if you know you have one pest, you look at the entire chain of this thing eats this thing, and then this thing eats this thing, and then this thing eats this thing, and you basically just build a healthy, balanced ecosystem of predator and prey, instead of trying to zap one particular insect or one particular thing that's interrupting your crop, so that you just recreate a balanced ecosystem that can keep itself in check. And then your crop or your animals or whatever you're doing can just fit into that. So she's talking about, what if we didn't eradicate cancer like that? What if we looked at the entire body and the entire gut microbiome and the entire health system of a human body and just built it all up so that its natural immunity against certain types of cancer could come in and zap it? Now, obviously, this doesn't apply if you have 4th stage breast cancer, but if you have a few cancerous cells in your cervix, for example, which is very, very common, is this something that you could do? So she's, radical, and we're doing a workshop in August talking about this kind of stuff and looking at how it could apply in healthcare. Finally, Intertwined by Design is a research paper that's going to be published later this year that's looking at regional fiber sheds. So food is not the only thing that comes out of soil. It's just the biggest thing that we know about and talk about that's cool enough to talk about. But fiber also used to come out of the soil. Not that much fiber, not anymore. 80% of the fiber in the world is polyester and polyester derivatives. 20% is cotton. And then there's this slice that's leather and wool and all the other things, which is why they say 80%, 20%, but they don't even give it a percentage. That's how small it is. So regional fiber sheds are not going to go ahead and take over the global fashion market anytime soon. But they are demonstration projects for how, if you look at all of the things that come out of soil, you could actually create regional economies that bring back artisanship, that bring back livelihoods versus just jobs. And it's beautiful. The organization called Fibershed was looking at creating the first big fiber shed in Northern California. And I actually have a coat that was supposed to be for me a demonstration. I didn't bring it because now I have a child. I had it made before I realized that babies spit up like all the time. And you don't spend $800 on a coat to have it ruined by poop or throw up. But this coat, as a demonstration project, I knew the lambs that the wool was sheared from, the sheep. Those sheep were grazed in a way that sequestered a ton of carbon. It was spun, it was washed and scoured in Northern Carolina because there's not North Carolina, because there isn't a big washing and scouring facility in California, but we're working on that. But when it was brought back, it was turned into that fuzzy stuff whose name I can't remember right now because early mom brain. But it was turned into the fuzzy stuff by the woman who owned the sheep. The fuzzy stuff was then spun into yarn by artisans that she worked with. And then that yarn was turned into cloth by Houston Textiles, where I was at their opening. They're in Mather, California. That cloth was then dyed by Heather, another friend, who grew the indigo to dye the coat. It was then sewed by Dan, another friend of mine, who did the design with me. And the end result of this coat was that it came from within 100 miles of where I was. And it's an artisan craft piece that's gonna last me my entire life, the way clothes used to. And if all of us owned just a few pieces like that, the amount of jobs that we could support and the amount of regional economic development we could support would be enormous. And it's a way to regenerate soil. So it's really beautiful. And this paper is not just demonstrating kind of a cute idea so that we could all have beautiful pieces of clothing. It's looking at the economic impact of bringing back that kind of regional economic development to very, very devastated rural areas, where just exporting a few different pieces like this over a period of time would have enormous impact. Enormous impact. In conclusion, the work I just mentioned, it gives me hope that innovation is happening. And not just the kind of innovation that we can rattle off the top of our head, but the kind of stuff where when I talk about social fertility, I can't anticipate that a college professor from North Carolina is going to call me with a project that's going to speak to everything that I want to speak to, that's going to be able to bring together the concepts of ecosystem restoration and racial equity in a way that I couldn't have imagined. There's this kind of brilliance all over the place. You have this kind of brilliance in you. It just takes the right spark and the right kind of community around you to activate it. So if we focus on our values, and if we focus on caring for people, that kind of innovation can't lose. It's when the focus is outside of the core thing that things start to fall apart. And technology is a huge piece of this. Technologically, we're getting more and more savvy, we're getting more and more disconnected, all of the things. But if we trust that we can have technology that's embedded deeply with values first, that we are going to make sure that we don't automate all of the jobs for all of the people out of existence, we can just say that out loud and say, make it so. It's not going to be easy because, you know, the folks that got the money love automation. Because then you don't have to deal with all those difficult things like HR and interpersonal conflicts, which is my last point. When I talk about starting from relationship, it's working on ourselves. Health is a mental, physical, spiritual, emotional endeavor for us. Knowing how we stay healthy means that we will be able to serve. You wouldn't be here if you weren't interested in some way in either serving or the people that serve when it comes to the environment and when it comes to health. But if you serve from a place of deficit, you will create deficit. And if you serve from a place of overflow, you will create solutions. And this has become no more clear to me than when I became a mother. So I encourage you all to have your own journeys of health as you think about all these concepts. and just think about how to serve from a place of overflow. Thank you.